A highly trained team of K9 German Shepherds was on a routine exercise in the snowy mountains. Then something unimaginable happened. Their handler, distracted for just a moment, lost sight of them. The dogs, guided only by instinct and loyalty, veered off into the deep woods. And that is when they saw him. A man. Barely conscious. Bloodied and bruised. Chains biting deep into his wrists, as he hung helplessly from a frozen tree. It was a forest ranger. Left for dead in the middle of nowhere. But instead of barking wildly or running away, the canines did something no one could have ever expected. What followed was a series of actions so precise, so moving, and so unbelievably human. It brought seasoned officers to tears. This is not just a story about survival. It is a powerful lesson about trust, about courage, and about how sometimes the ones we believe need us the most are actually the ones who end up saving us. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That is how we continue sharing these unforgettable stories of loyalty, of resilience, and of the unbreakable bond between humans and dogs. A bond that defies all odds. The snow had been falling for hours, burying the trails of Bitter Creek National Reserve under a white, glistening blanket. Not many dared to venture into this part of Wyoming in the dead of winter, except for rangers like Thomas Grady. At 42, Thomas had given 20 years of his life to protecting the land, the wildlife, and the people who passed through it. But today, he was not on patrol. He was not tracking poachers. He was not helping lost hikers. Today, he was chained to a tree. His breath came in short, icy bursts. Blood dripped from a gash on his temple, running down to his frostbitten cheek. Heavy chains wrapped around his chest and arms, locking him against the gnarled pine as if he were part of it. His wrists, bound behind him, were already raw. The skin split open from struggling. His uniform was torn, soaked in a mix of blood and melted snow. He could no longer feel his fingers. He could barely hold on to consciousness. It had been 2 days. 2 days since he had been ambushed. He remembered the voices. Angry, muffled under ski masks. They wanted access to the reserve. Land for illegal hunting. For logging. And for whatever else money could buy in the shadows. Thomas refused. So they made an example out of him. They left him in the woods to freeze. To disappear without a trace. But something was coming. At first, it was just a whisper in the wind. Then soft thuds crunching through the snow. Thomas opened his swollen eyes. Was it another hallucination? The cold had been playing tricks on him for hours. He squinted, trying to separate dream from reality. And then he saw them. 5 shapes. Dark against the snow. Moving low and steady. At first, panic surged in his chest. Wolves. His mind jumped back to old survival training. Stay still. Do not show fear. But as the figures drew closer, he realized these were not wild predators. They were K9 German Shepherds. Their coats were thick, dusted with snow. Their eyes were alert, golden and sharp. Each of them moved with purpose. Not like strays, but like soldiers on a mission. One of them, larger than the rest, stepped ahead. He sniffed the air. He locked eyes with Thomas. And then something astonishing happened. The dog did not bark. He did not growl. He sat right in front of Thomas. Ears perked. Chest proud. Like a statue. Then another came forward, sniffing the base of the tree. Another began circling the area. The others fanned out in a pattern that looked tactical. These dogs were not lost. They were trained. Thomas felt tears sting the corners of his eyes. Half from the emotion, half from the biting wind. He could not speak. But he managed to whisper. Good boys. The alpha shepherd, the one with a scar over his left eye, took a step forward and sniffed the chain. He barked once. Short. Sharp. It echoed through the trees. Thomas did not know if anyone would hear. But the dogs did. They began to act. One started digging in the snow around the chain, revealing the padlock. Another jumped up, barking toward the sky, alerting someone. Or something. It was as if they knew exactly what needed to be done. Minutes felt like hours. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness. But just before darkness claimed him again, he heard it. Distant voices. Footsteps running through the woods. And then a human voice. Urgent. I see him over here. Thomas barely lifted his head. Through the blur of snow and pain, he saw a man in a police uniform, flanked by more handlers coming through the trees. The dogs had done it. They had brought help. But as Thomas's vision began to fade, he caught one last glimpse. The alpha canine, standing just a few feet away, staring at him. Not with curiosity, not with confusion, but with understanding. And then, Thomas passed out. Thomas awoke to the sharp scent of antiseptic and the low beeping of a heart monitor. His body ached in 1,000 places, like someone had driven nails into every bone and nerve. He blinked slowly. The harsh fluorescent light of the ranger station's infirmary stung his eyes. It was warm here. Too warm. After days in the freezing wilderness, his skin seemed almost numb from the sudden heat. A nurse appeared beside him. You are safe now, she said gently. You are lucky they found you in time. Thomas tried to speak, but his voice came out as a rasp. The dogs, where are the dogs? She smiled warmly. They are outside. The K9 unit that found you. They have been waiting. Especially one of them. The big one with the scar. Thomas let his head fall back on the pillow. It had not been a dream. The canines were real. Later that day, Sheriff Dalton came in, his face a mix of relief and restrained anger. Dalton was a rugged man, in his 50s, built like an oak tree, and just as unmovable. Grady, Dalton said gruffly, pulling a chair close. You have got one hell of a story to tell. Thomas nodded slowly. How did they find me? He asked. Dalton leaned back, arms crossed. Our K9 team was running a winter training circuit out in the eastern woods. They got separated from their handler after a sudden whiteout. We thought they were lost, until they returned on their own. But not to the checkpoint. They came back to the main station, barking, covered in snow. One of the handlers, Rachel Vance, knew something was wrong. She trusted them, loaded up the ATV, and followed them. They led her straight to you. Thomas closed his eyes, his chest tightening. They saved my life, he whispered. Dalton nodded. Yes, but here is where it gets strange. He pulled a folder from under his arm and opened it. Inside was a map of the forest, covered with hand-drawn notes. You were chained to a tree in a sector that has not been patrolled in over 5 years. No active trails, no campsites, no fire roads. Whoever did this to you knew exactly where to leave someone they did not want found. Thomas clenched his jaw. Illegal operations. They wanted me quiet. They almost succeeded. Dalton muttered. We will find them. But there is something else. Dalton stood and opened the door to the hallway. A moment later, in padded a large German shepherd. Calm, steady. His scarred eyes still sharp. He stopped in the doorway, ears forward, then walked straight to Thomas's bed. He rested his head gently on the mattress. Meet Valor, Dalton said. 8 years old, decorated military K9. Retired from service after his handler was killed overseas. Since then, he has had trouble adjusting. Does not bond, does not trust. But for some reason, he chose you. Thomas reached out, his hand trembling. He touched the dog's thick neck. Valor closed his eyes and leaned into the touch, like it was the only warmth he had ever known. Rachel Vance walked in next. She was in her early 30s, with deep brown eyes and snow-blonde hair pulled into a tight braid. Valor has never acted like this before, she said, her voice full of awe. Not since he lost his partner. It is like something shifted in him when he found you. Thomas looked from her to the dog, his heart heavy. I was not just another rescue to him. He understood what I was feeling. Rachel nodded softly. He stayed by your side the whole time. Would not move until we took you out by sled. Even then, he kept looking back at you. Like he was not sure we could be trusted. Thomas looked at Valor. You saved me. You chose me. But just as that warmth settled in, the door burst open again. A deputy rushed in. Face pale. Voice shaking. Sheriff, something is wrong. We found fresh tire tracks near Sector 12. And chains, recently cut. Someone was back there last night. Dalton's expression hardened. They came back. Thomas sat up sharply, pain flaring through his ribs. They think I am still out there. They are tying up loose ends. The room went silent. Valor stood alert. Ears sharp. Tail rigid. Something was coming. The ranger station had never felt so quiet. Snow still fell outside. Soft rhythmic waves coating the trees in a fresh layer of white. But inside, tension sat heavy in the air. Deputies whispered behind closed doors. Sheriff Dalton had not left the communications room since the discovery of the new tire tracks. Whatever was happening out there, whoever had come back, they were not finished. Thomas sat on a wooden bench near the side window, wrapped in a thermal blanket, his hands still bandaged, deep bruises coloring his jaw and ribs. But his mind was sharper now. He could not shake the feeling. The forest was holding its breath. Something was lurking beneath the silence. Valor lay at his feet like a sentinel. Not asleep. Never asleep. Just breathing slow and steady. The scar across his eye made him look intimidating to most. But to Thomas, that mark told a deeper story. Pain. Yes. But also survival. Rachel Vance entered quietly, holding a steaming mug of coffee. Still refusing the painkillers? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Thomas took the cup, his fingers brushing hers. They make my head foggy. I cannot afford that right now. She sat beside him, keeping her voice low. We are bringing in federal investigators. This case goes beyond poaching. Too coordinated, too clean. Someone had maps, gear, and the nerve to leave a man for dead. Thomas looked down at Valor. And someone made a mistake. Rachel followed his gaze. Valor. He was not supposed to be there. None of them were. But they found me. They were not lost. They were sent. Rachel looked confused. No one sent them, she said softly. Thomas leaned forward slightly. Then something else did. There was a pause. Not one of doubt, but of realization. Rachel had spent years training K-9 units. She knew when something went beyond explanation. He has not left your side once, she said gently. Even when I call, he waits for your permission. Thomas glanced at the dog. He reminds me of the kind of ranger I used to be. Before all this. Loyal. Relentless. Always alert. Rachel hesitated. Then asked, Do you think he could work with you? Thomas blinked. What do you mean? He is retired from the force. Technically. Too much trauma, they said. But Valor has never connected with anyone like this. If you wanted to keep him, you would both need to train, build the partnership. But I think he has already chosen. Thomas did not answer at first. His eyes stayed locked on the dog. Valor met his gaze without blinking. There was something unsaid between them. Something deeper than language. Then Thomas whispered, If he is willing, I will not let him go. Just then, a sudden bark shattered the stillness. Short. Controlled. From Valor. He stood up fast. Muscles tense. Ears back. Nose high. Rachel jumped to her feet. What is it, boy? Another bark came. Louder. Urgent. Then came a noise. Faint. Metal on metal. From the back of the building. Thomas stood, ignoring the pain, screaming through his legs. That was the garage door, Thomas said, grabbing the radio from the bench. Before he could key it, the power went out. Everything plunged into darkness. Rachel pulled out her flashlight. Its beam cutting through the room in a shaky cone. Stay here, she said. I will check it out. But Valor growled. A low, guttural sound. He moved to block the door. Rachel froze. Thomas's voice was calm. He does not want you to go alone. Outside, a shape moved past the window. Just a flash. Too fast to make out. Then came the crash of breaking glass at the far end of the station. Rachel raised her radio. We have got an intruder. South entrance. Repeat, south entrance. But before she could finish the call, a loud bang echoed through the hall. Thomas reached for the nearest weapon. An old hatchet hanging on the wall. We need to move. Valor was already ahead of them, leading the way with sharp eyes and a low, steady body. They moved in silence through the narrow corridor, past the sleeping quarters and the mess hall. The generator backup had not kicked in yet. Every step felt like a countdown. Then they heard it. A voice. Low. Male. Close. I told you he would not die out there. Thomas's blood turned to ice. They were back. And this time, they were not planning on leaving witnesses. The sound of footsteps echoed off the cold concrete walls. Slow. Deliberate. Whoever was inside the ranger station was not in a hurry. They were confident. Too confident. Thomas's grip on the hatchet tightened. Every muscle in his battered body ached. But adrenaline overpowered the pain. At his side, Valor moved like a shadow. Body low. Every step silent and precise. Rachel brought up the rear. Her flashlight beams slicing through the black hallway in short, controlled bursts. Her sidearm was drawn now. They reached the supply room first. Empty. Then the south hallway. Quiet. And then came the unmistakable sound of breathing. Not theirs. From behind the door to the generator room. Thomas raised a hand to signal silence. Valor's ears twitched. His body stiffened. He was locked in. Thomas leaned close to Rachel and whispered. We open that door. We do not know what is waiting. Are you ready? Rachel nodded once, her finger tightening on the trigger. Thomas took a deep breath and kicked the door open. Nothing. The generator room was empty. At least it looked that way. The light from Rachel's flashlight swept across the space, revealing tools, a broken chair, an overturned oil can, and then a glint of steel. Back! Rachel shouted, just as the man lunged from behind the generator, swinging a crowbar. Thomas ducked just in time, the metal cutting through the air where his head had been. Valor did not wait. He launched forward with terrifying precision, jaws clamping down on the attacker's arm, forcing the crowbar to fall with a clatter. The man screamed in rage, not fear. Stupid dog! He shouted. But Valor was not letting go. Thomas grabbed the man's other arm and slammed him against the wall, pinning him down. You were supposed to kill me, Thomas hissed. And walk away, huh? Thomas growled. The intruder struggled. But with Thomas's weight and Valor's bite holding him down, he had no chance. Rachel quickly cuffed the man, reading him his rights with a steady voice. But as the man spat blood onto the floor, he grinned. You think I am the only one? Thomas froze. Check the perimeter, Rachel barked. Now! They left the man restrained and rushed back into the hallway. Outside the window, flashlights danced in the distance. More movement. More shadows. And then gunfire. Pop. 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 West side! Came a deputy's voice over the station radio. They are breaching the vehicle garage! Thomas turned to Rachel. They are not here for me anymore. They are here to erase everything. Valor barked once, sharp and urgent, and sprinted toward the main entrance. Thomas followed without hesitation. Through the side window, he could see two masked figures breaking into the garage, weapons drawn. One of the snowmobiles was already hot-wired and humming. They are planning to escape through the North Ridge, Rachel said. If they get into those woods, we will never find them. Thomas looked at Valor. Can you stop them? As if answering, Valor took off through the emergency exit, his paws barely touching the ground as he vanished into the snowy darkness. Thomas and Rachel scrambled behind him, snow crunching underfoot, the wind howling through the trees. In the clearing beyond the garage, headlights flashed. One of the intruders had climbed onto the snowmobile, revving it wildly. But just as he turned to speed off, Valor collided with him mid-chest. The man screamed, thrown from the vehicle into a snowdrift. The second figure raised a weapon. But Thomas was faster. He hurled the hatchet. The handle struck the gunman's hand, sending the weapon flying. Rachel tackled him moments later. The fight ended as quickly as it had begun. Deputies arrived seconds later, cuffing the remaining intruders. Securing the scene, Thomas stood in the snow, chest heaving, his clothes soaked, his body shaking. And then he saw Valor. The dog limped toward him. A bullet had grazed just above his leg. But still proud, still standing, Thomas dropped to his knees in the snow, opened his arms. Valor walked straight into him, and rested his head on Thomas's chest. "You saved us again," Thomas whispered, holding him close. "You saved everyone." But even as the moment settled, Thomas felt something deeper shift inside him. This was not just about rescue anymore. This was about purpose. The ranger station was once again secure. But the air inside had shifted. Deputies moved cautiously, speaking in hushed tones. The prisoners had been separated and taken into custody. Valor had been treated for his wound. A clean graze. It had not pierced muscle, but it had earned him a bandaged leg. And a hero's rest. Thomas sat beside him, on the floor of the medical bay, his hand gently resting on the dog's chest. Valor's breathing was calm, rhythmic, his eyes watching the door, as if he still expected more danger. Thomas stayed right there with him. It did not feel safe. Not yet. Rachel entered quietly, holding a file thick with incident reports. "They are refusing to talk," she said, her voice low. "All three of them. No names, no prints in the system, no ID." Thomas frowned. "That does not make sense. They knew the terrain, our patrol schedules, even the generator's location." Rachel hesitated, then handed him a smaller folder. "That is why I pulled this from the logs. Look at the date." Thomas opened it. His eyes narrowed. For weeks ago, a civilian contractor had been granted short-term access to the north side of the reserve. Name, Jack Melton. Purpose, equipment maintenance for the wildlife cameras. Only problem was, Thomas had never approved it, and the signature on the form was not his. He looked up at Rachel. "Someone forged this." Rachel nodded. "And not just someone. Someone with internal clearance." Thomas's jaw clenched. "You are saying this came from inside?" Rachel did not answer. She did not have to. That night, after the station had quieted, Thomas stepped outside for air. Snow still fell lightly, blanketing the world in a deceptive calm. Valor limped beside him, tail swaying softly, nose twitching as he scanned the horizon. And then they saw him. Sheriff Dalton, standing near the north perimeter, alone, facing the woods. Thomas paused. "That is strange." Dalton turned at the sound of footsteps, and gave a forced smile. "Could not sleep either." "Something like that," Thomas replied, eyes narrowing. Dalton motioned toward the trees. "Funny, is it not? After all these years out here, the biggest threat was never the animals." Thomas did not respond. Dalton sighed and stepped closer. "They were just trying to make a deal. I did not know they would take it that far. Chain you up like that, that was not part of the plan." Thomas froze. The words sank in slowly, like poison. "You," he whispered. "It was you." Dalton's face twisted. Not with guilt, but with exhaustion. "You were in the way. You kept blocking permits, digging into reports that were meant to be buried. They offered money, just to look the other way. That is all it was supposed to be." Thomas's fists clenched. "You left me there to die." Dalton nodded coldly. "I did not think you would survive. No one could have. Not in that storm." Then he glanced at Valor. "But I did not count on him." Valor let out a low growl, body rigid. Dalton took a slow step back. "Look, you walk away from this. I can make sure no more trouble comes to your door. You and that dog get a medal, Retire early. And no one ever knows. But Thomas was already shaking his head. You think I am going to stay quiet after everything? Dalton's hand moved to his belt. Slowly. Too slowly. Valor lunged before he could draw. The sheriff hit the ground with a grunt. Pinned by 100 pounds of trained force. But this time, Thomas did not stop the dog. He stepped forward and looked Dalton in the eyes. You betrayed your oath. You betrayed me. By the time Rachel and the deputies arrived, the truth was already unraveling. Thomas handed over the forged documents. Rachel reviewed the station logs carefully. Valor, still at Thomas's side, watched every move. The man who had led them for over a decade was arrested in silence. But even as the doors closed behind Dalton, Thomas knew the damage ran deeper than betrayal. He turned to Rachel. Everything he touched is compromised. Every permit, every report. We have to start over. Rachel nodded. Then we do. Together. Thomas looked down at Valor. And not without him. But something inside Valor had changed. That night, he paced the station walls restlessly. His instincts sharp. His ears always alert. Thomas sat beside him. As the fire crackled in the background. You knew before any of us. You felt it. Valor did not respond. But his eyes never left the shadows outside. Something told Thomas. This was not over. The following days were heavy with silence and snowfall. Investigators arrived from the state capitol. They combed through every corner of the ranger station. Digging up permits. Digging up history. Digging up the lies Dalton had buried for years. The truth came out in fragments. A network of illegal land sales. Forged access for criminal groups. And rangers who had quietly been pushed out or silenced. Thomas gave statement after statement. His voice steady. But his eyes tired. The betrayal still throbbed in the back of his mind. Like an old wound. He had trusted Dalton for years. They had worked side by side. Built cabins together. Fought fires together. And yet, the man who once handed him his badge had left him to die, chained like an animal. But Valor never left his side. Not once. He followed Thomas through every interview. Every briefing. Every silent midnight walk through the snow. Deputies no longer saw him as just a canine. They began treating him like a soldier. A brother. Something between man and myth. On the third night after Dalton's arrest, Thomas stood by the fenced perimeter of the station grounds. The sky above was clear for once. The stars glittering coldly over the treetops. His breath came out in slow clouds. Rachel approached quietly. They are offering you a transfer, she said. Back to Helena. Full benefits, counseling, desk job. Thomas did not answer at first. He looked down at Valor, who lay at his feet, tail wagging once when their eyes met. Do I look like someone who belongs behind a desk? He said finally. Rachel gave a tired smile. Did not think so. He glanced over at her. They are not going to stop, are they? Rachel's smile faded. No. There is too much money buried in these trees. Too many names we have not uncovered yet. And too many of them still out there. Thomas nodded slowly. Then I stay. Rachel handed him an envelope. Thought you would say that. This is your official transfer into the K9 division. If you want it. Valor has been cleared for reactivation under your command. Thomas opened the envelope with quiet hands. Inside was a crisp file. His name. Valor's name was there. A unit designation. Ranger Tactical K9 Unit Echo. You really think I am qualified? Thomas asked. Rachel looked between him and the dog. I think you already are. Thomas knelt beside Valor. He ran a hand down his thick fur. What do you say, partner? Valor barked softly. A low, confident sound. A sound that said yes. But as the days passed, the peace felt thinner. That sense of being watched returned. Deputies reported odd disturbances. Tracks in the snow that did not match wildlife. Equipment moved out of place. Short bursts of radio interference at night. Nothing conclusive, but enough to unsettle even the most seasoned rangers. Then late one evening, Thomas was reviewing reports alone in the communications cabin, when the security monitor blinked out. Static. Then black. He tried to reconnect the feed, but something jammed the signal. That was when Valor stood, ears up, muscles tense. A second later, the emergency lights outside flickered on. Thomas stepped out into the cold, flashlight in one hand, service weapon on his hip. Valor trotted ahead, tail low, nose to the wind. They reached the edge of the station's fence. Nothing. Snow. Trees. Silence. But then, a sound. A soft clink. Chains. The same metallic rattle that haunted Thomas in his sleep. He turned to his right, just as a figure darted behind a tree. "Hey!" Thomas shouted. "Show yourself!" No response. Just the whisper of wind and snow. Valor growled low, protective. And then, just before the figure vanished completely into the dark, a glint of silver caught the moonlight. A badge. Thomas's blood ran cold. It was not over. Someone from inside. Someone else was still out there, watching. Thomas barely slept that night. The image of the mysterious badge flashing in the moonlight haunted him. He knew what it meant. Dalton had not acted alone. Someone else in uniform, someone with clearance and access, was still working from the inside. By sunrise, the snow had stopped falling, leaving the forest eerily quiet under a pale winter sky. Rachel assembled a small response team, but the tracks left by the intruder had been expertly covered. Whoever had come near the station had done so with military precision. Still, Thomas could not shake the weight in his chest. He glanced at Valor, who had not taken his eyes off the tree leans since the night before. The bond between them had become something deeper than instinct. It was trust, forged in survival. Thomas did not need words to understand what Valor felt. Something was coming. Later that afternoon, Thomas and Rachel drove out to one of the inactive patrol cabins, on the edge of Sector 9, a place few ventured in winter. Dalton had signed off on the cabin being unsafe for winter use months ago, and no one had questioned it. But something told Thomas that was the place to start. As they arrived, Valor jumped from the back of the truck. Before it had even come to a full stop, he sniffed the air, hackles rising. Inside the cabin, Valor's name was there. A unit designation. Ranger Tactical K9 Unit Echo. "You really think I am qualified?" Thomas asked. Rachel looked between him and the dog. "I think you already are." Thomas knelt beside Valor. He ran a hand down his thick fur. "What do you say, partner?" Valor barked softly. A low, confident sound. A sound that said yes. But as the days passed, the peace felt thinner. That sense of being watched returned. Deputies reported odd disturbances. Tracks in the snow that did not match wildlife. Equipment moved out of place. Short bursts of radio interference at night. Nothing conclusive, but enough to unsettle even the most seasoned rangers. Then late one evening, Thomas was reviewing reports alone in the communications cabin, when the security monitor blinked out. Static. Then black. He tried to reconnect the feed, but something jammed the signal. That was when Valor stood, ears up, muscles tense. A second later, the emergency lights outside flickered on. Thomas stepped out into the cold, flashlight in one hand, service weapon on his hip. Valor trotted ahead, tail low, nose to the wind. They reached the edge of the station's fence. Nothing. Snow. Trees. Silence. But then, a sound. A soft clink. Chains. The same metallic rattle that haunted Thomas in his sleep. He turned to his right, just as a figure darted behind a tree. "Hey!" Thomas shouted. "Show yourself!" No response. Just the whisper of wind and snow. Valor growled low, protective. And then, just before the figure vanished completely into the dark, a glint of silver caught the moonlight. A badge. Thomas's blood ran cold. It was not over. Someone from inside. Someone else was still out there, watching. Thomas barely slept that night. The image of the mysterious badge flashing in the moonlight haunted him. He knew what it meant. Dalton had not acted alone. Someone else in uniform, someone with clearance and access, was still working from the inside. By sunrise, the snow had stopped falling, leaving the forest eerily quiet under a pale winter sky. Rachel assembled a small response team. But the tracks left by the intruder had been expertly covered. Whoever had come near the station had done so with military precision. Still, Thomas could not shake the weight in his chest. He glanced at Valor, who had not taken his eyes off the tree limbs since the night before. The bond between them had become something deeper than instinct. It was trust, forged in survival. Thomas did not need words to understand what Valor felt. Something was coming. Later that afternoon, Thomas and Rachel drove out to one of the inactive patrol cabins, on the edge of Sector 9, a place few ventured in winter. Dalton had signed off on the cabin being unsafe for winter use months ago, and no one had questioned it. But something told Thomas that was the place to start. As they arrived, Valor jumped from the back of the truck. Before it had even come to a full stop, he sniffed the air, hackles rising. Inside the cabin,